I have the benefit of having a lot of the previous presenters go through a lot of the material that I have here, so we'll be able to breeze through this, which will hopefully save us a few more minutes, Mr. Cimadevilla. So let's talk about the implementation of the strategic model for a new economy. This is the third credit conference that we've been at, so most of you probably have become acquainted with the strategic model for a new economy. At its base, you have transparency and communication, as well as the fiscal credit stabilization, which the Government Development Bank has so ably been able to take charge of in these 2 years. On that base, you have three pillars: restoring growth on a short, medium, and long-term basis, investing in the infrastructure of Puerto Rico, and making sure to convert through competitiveness reforms the areas that have traditionally been competitive disadvantages in Puerto Rico into competitive advantages. So when we talk about the reforms, the strategic model had 6 initial reforms. This was the work plan for the 4-year plan, and we've been fortunate enough to be able to get 5 of those 6 reforms approved already. I think the governor and a few others have already gone through them. The last, which was implemented, the tax reform, which will have a wonderful effect on the economic development of Puerto Rico, in particular with the lowering of the corporate tax rate from maximum 41% to 30%, and reducing from 7 brackets to 3 brackets, 20, 25, and 30%. And by the year 2014, merging those 3 brackets into 2 brackets, 20 and 25%. Now, there are a few incentives that are meant to bring foreign direct investment, and these I'll discuss somewhat. The first one is the housing incentives. We've seen a spike in terms of the sales of new and existing properties, and this has been the result of this act that was approved back in August of 2010. Basically, it creates a window within which, whether residents of Puerto Rico or outside of Puerto Rico can purchase properties, the property will be exempt from capital gains for the life of the property that the owner has it for. It also gives you a window of 5 years where there's no property tax, and a window of 10 years where if you buy the property in order to rent, you will not be taxed on the rental income. The closing costs for properties are also reduced substantially, so it's a wonderful moment to buy a property in Puerto Rico. So any of those that are here that are interested, please take advantage of this opportunity. The window will close on June the 30th. The tourism area is an area that's of great importance to Puerto Rico. Traditionally, we have had the Tourism Development Act, which was recently revamped, and it provides 90% tax exemption as well as tax credits that can be used as equity in order to finance hotels. And most of the hotels that we see in Puerto Rico have taken advantage of these mechanisms, which obviously have created a situation in Puerto Rico that is different from what we find in the rest of the Caribbean, where with the slow downturn in the economy, we've seen Puerto Rico actually ramp up and create new hotels and build and construct, whereas other jurisdictions have not been able to keep up. So now that the economy is turning around, we're in a position to be able to have a hotel offering that goes beyond what other jurisdictions may be able to provide. The Tourism Incentives for the Economic Development of Municipalities Act is basically another tourism act which specializes on massive large-scale tourism projects that include tourism components as well as commercial components and gaming components as well. And it has a sliding scale where, depending on how much you invest, you may be able to get as low a rate as 8% for a 30-year period, with possible extensions on a tax decree, which is basically a contract between the government of Puerto Rico and the taxpayer. We've also revamped the film development industry, and what we've done is add to the credits that we had before and make them much more proactive in a way that doesn't affect the Treasury. The credits that are in existence are 40% tax credit for expenses incurred here in Puerto Rico. That was what was there before, but we've added a 20% additional credit for talent, which basically means the actors that come from outside of Puerto Rico. Now that could be a substantial hit to the Treasury, but for the fact that we're also doing a 20% withholding, so it should be on a net basis even for the Treasury. And we've also, as the Governor and others have said, passed the energy reform in Puerto Rico. Through the energy reform, we've created a renewable portfolio standard which demands that the production of energy in Puerto Rico increase from 1% to 15% by the year 2020. And in order to be able to do so, we've provided for some incentives through a green energy fund that will have $290 million over the next 10 years to provide up to a 60% tax credit on the purchase and the installation for residential renewable energies. And up to a 50% tax credit for light industrial renewable energies that may be implemented. And finally, we have in the legislature, which we have hopes will be approved soon, an international insurance bill, which will provide for a decree mechanism, which is the same as we use in manufacturing. Through this bill, we will be providing for a 4% tax credit for a 15-year period for international insurance companies that establish themselves in Puerto Rico. Now, there's another area that we're pushing in terms of incentives through Law 73, which was approved back in 2008. It's the law that is established mainly for manufacturing, but the new law includes the exporting of services. And in particular, an area that we think would be very beneficial for this group and others to consider are export services in the area of financial services. As qualified export services under Law 73 are some areas of investment banking, asset management, management of hedge funds, private equity placement, trust fund management, and other areas, if it's for services outside of Puerto Rico. And to the extent that you establish a company on the island, you would be entitled to a 4% tax decree for a period of 15 years, as well as 90% tax exemption on property tax, 60% exemption on municipal tax, and you would not pay taxes on dividends above $250,000. So let's also take a look at the Precedent Task Force. As the president of the government, the ex-president of the Government Development Bank mentioned, and I believe the governor mentioned as well, the President of the United States created a task force to analyze a series of different issues affecting Puerto Rico, from status to health and also to economic development. And basically, what this report has done is validate that the areas that we have been focusing on in terms of building on the infrastructure of Puerto Rico for the future have been the correct areas and the ones that have the most potential for Puerto Rico's economic development. Those include broadband access, the redevelopment of Roosevelt roads, renewable energy in general, the Port of the Americas, and Science and Research Center, basically moving towards an economy based on knowledge. So very quickly going through these, what have we done and where are we on the broadband access front? The legislature approved and the governor recently signed Act number 101 of 2010, which basically establishes that the municipalities, in conjunction with other government agencies, will have the mandate to establish free internet centers and Wi-Fi access in some of the areas, the public areas of some of the municipalities. And obviously this is something that's meant to provide access to the internet as well as broadband to the people in Puerto Rico in general, and obviously connect them to the rest of the world on this global economy. We've also been able to get $40 million worth of ARA funds that have already been awarded for a series of projects that are meant to establish and strengthen the infrastructure on the broadband front for Puerto Rico. On the Roosevelt Roads Naval Base, we approved Act number 118 of 2010, which is the act that I mentioned earlier on economic development for municipalities, which is meant to bring foreign direct investment for large-scale tourism projects that include commercial components, gaming components, and such, with a sliding scale. And one of the places where we think we may be able to establish one of these large complexes would be on Roosevelt Roads, and have that be the cornerstone of a development on the eastern coast of Puerto Rico that would establish a Caribbean Riviera on that whole eastern seaboard. The next steps for the redevelopment of Roosevelt Roads are the approval of the economic development conveyance, as well as the transfer of 1,300 acres from the government of the United States to the government of Puerto Rico to be able to then implement the plans on these complexes. When we talk about renewable energy, and I've already mentioned the renewable portfolio standard, where we're going to move from 1%, less than 1% production from renewable resources to 15% by the year 2020, and the Green Energy Fund that's going to allow for that to happen. We've also, through those, been able to secure 17 power purchase agreements for 630 megawatts through the Electric Power Authority. Now, from those, we expect that 6 of these projects are going to commence construction in 2011 with an investment of $827 million, and that obviously will have a long-term effect on the economy, but more importantly for us immediately, we're going to see that money circulate through the economy, provide liquidity and the multiplier effect, and that will be very good for the economic projections that we have. As far as the Port of the Americas, construction has continued from the last time that we were before you. The port has capacity for 250 TEUs or containers. That will increase this year to 500,000 TEUs, and we're also already seeing companies that are establishing themselves and developing manufacturing activities around the port in the value-added zones. SGR Ponce is the first manufacturing company that's going to use the value-added zones that surround the port by creating 115 jobs, and that obviously will have a great synergistic effect with the Port of the Americas. Research and development has been an area that we have been pushing from the very beginning. We believe that is the bridge that will take us to a knowledge-based economy, and the task force agrees with us. And ultimately, we had already established Science City, which is a project that we're pushing and creating as a strategic project here in Puerto Rico. We have now received validation that this is a project that should move forth, and we're going to see a lot more cooperation from federal agencies in terms of funding for these types of activities. What have we done in this area so far? Well, we've approved Act number 150 of 2010. That act establishes that University of Puerto Rico faculty should be able to commercialize intellectual property that they create in Puerto Rico. This is something that may not sound as groundbreaking, but it very much is. One of the biggest obstacles for the development of intellectual property and research and development right here on the island have been the archaic rules, regulations, and limitations that we ourselves have imposed on those that are most subject and likely to be able to create intellectual property. Those have now been removed. We've also filed a bill, which is in the legislature, to create a science district within the area where Science City would be located, and this would provide for specific incentives in the area of research and development to be able to attract some of that activity to the island and create a cluster that will then be able to serve the rest of the manufacturing sector that we have in the pharmaceutical area, as well as others as well in Puerto Rico. Science City, as far as the project in infrastructure terms, has already had the approval of the site consultation, which means that we should be ready to start construction within the next 6 months. And the Government Development Bank has approved a $64 million line of credit for the construction of the MD Anderson Comprehensive Cancer Center, which will be the first tangible construction that we'll see in Science City. Now, Bahia Urbana is not part of the White House task force report, but since it's one of the big infrastructure projects that we're handling, I figured I'd give you an update from the last time that we spoke. The government of Puerto Rico has assigned $31 million for the construction of immediate improvement areas in the Bahia Urbana project, which is basically the redevelopment of the San Juan waterfront. And this project is now fully permitted. So we are ready to start construction on the notice to proceed for Piers 7 and 8, and in fact construction has already started on some of the interim improvements, and this project is slated to be completed by the end of this term. So then let's take a look at the economic performance indicators and see where we are. In manufacturing, payroll commitment has increased over the last 3 years. The new Purchase Managers Index, which if you fall above 50, you're in an expansion mode as a manufacturing area. If you're below 50%, you're in a contraction mode, has been in an expansion mode over the last 4 months. It has been in an expansion mode 6 out of the last 7 months and 8 of the last 10 months. That is obviously a very heartwarming sign for us, given that manufacturing is such an important part of the Puerto Rican economy. Since 2009, the Puerto Rico Industrial Development Corporation has created over 10,000 jobs and $430 million worth of commitments made on future investments to Puerto Rico. In agriculture, seed production gross income has increased by 15% year over year, and we're also going in a direction of research and development in areas such as agriculture. Pioneer Hybrid is a company that specializes on research and development in this area, and they have invested $6.3 million in order to establish a plant here whereby they'll be creating 115 jobs, and this is an area that we will be pushing in the agricultural sector. In tourism and entertainment, we have been very proactive in order to increase air access and cruise ship access to Puerto Rico. As an island, we depend on access from abroad, and that means that we need to bring airlines to Puerto Rico, and we need to make sure that those that want to come by sea can also come to Puerto Rico. Airline passenger movement has increased by 4.2%. Home port passenger movement has made an astounding jump of 21%. We've added 250 additional weekly flights since 2009, and we've also been able to add routes that have not been in place in Puerto Rico for close to a decade, such as direct routes to Madrid, to London, and to Frankfurt. In the cruise lines sector, we've added Disney Cruise Lines, which will be establishing themselves in Puerto Rico in the next year, Holland America, Celebrity Cruises, Silver Seas, and American Ferries. And home port passenger movement, with this jump of 21%, is now at the highest level that it has been in 5 years. If we take a look at hotel occupancy rates, they've slightly increased, but they've been able to maintain the average daily rate. That's very important so that the rates maintain where they are. And we've seen the opening of wonderful new hotels in Puerto Rico, such as the W Retreat. We've seen the Sheraton Convention Center, as well as the St. Regis, where we're at right now. And among other hotels, we've seen the investment of $700 million in Puerto Rico through these hotels that have opened, with 3,400 job creation in the construction phase and 1,200 permanent positions that have been created as a result of this. For the next 2 years, that will increase. We'll see the creation of 26 additional hotel projects with an investment of over $1.2 billion and the creation of 3,400 permanent jobs. In the commerce and trade area, we've seen retail increase by 1.5%, but more importantly, we've seen auto sales increase by 17.5%. The importance of this is that autos and auto sales are numbers that are correlated with consumer confidence to the extent that that's a purchase that you don't make lightly. So the fact that we are seeing such increases means that the consumer is confident that the economy of Puerto Rico is headed in the right direction. Also in commerce and trade, we've seen exports increase by 14% and imports increase by 3.2%. As part of the measures that the administration has implemented in order to be able to get these results are 16 trade missions, which have exceeded sales by over $118 million in the last 2 years. In the banking, insurance, and credit union sector, we've seen property sales, new property sales increase by 55%. As I said, that's a result of the new housing incentives that were approved by the legislature and signed by the governor of Puerto Rico last year. Existing property sales are also up by 12.3%. Now, also in the banking, insurance, and credit union sector, we've seen subscribed insurance premiums increase by 5.3%, assets and deposits in credit union by 5%, and 4.1% respectively. We've also seen the creation of 14 new insurance companies here in Puerto Rico with assets totaling close to $900 million and investment on the island of $30 million. Now, in the film industry sector, which is a sector that we believe there's quite a bit of potential, since 2009 there have been 24 productions on the island, and this has represented an investment of $111 million in investment. And our expectation and projection is that for this next year, with the incentives that have been put in place, we're going to exceed $60 million, and my personal understanding is that we're going to exceed it by quite a bit. Taking a quick look at the Government Development Bank's Economic Activity Index, we can see that from the beginning of the recession, when the government closed in April of 2006, everything came down in a steep way. We reached a period of stabilization over the last year and a half, and now the trend is clearly going upwards. And as Juan Carlos Badge indicated, the index for the month of February is the first uptick that we have seen since October of 2010. And if you take into account the different things that have been happening over the past year, you'll get a clear picture of the direction in which Puerto Rico is headed. I think you already will have gotten that picture from what the governor has said, the ex-president of the bank, the president of the bank, and all the other government officials. But let's take a look. In January of 2010, the government's Economic Council indicated that they believe the economy was entering into a stabilization phase. Moody's and Standard & Poor's recognized Puerto Rico's positive fiscal measures. Then Moody's recalibrates and upgrades Puerto Rico by 3 notches to A3. Keith Breeden Woods and UBS both comment on the fiscal progress that is being made in Puerto Rico, as well as the economic development prospects on the island. The Department of Commerce validates the strategic model for a new economy that Puerto Rico is implementing. Standard & Poor's then issued a stable outlook for Puerto Rico's credit, followed by Fitch, which gave us ratings of BBB+. Then Business Monitor International revised their economic projections for Puerto Rico for the next 5 years from 0.9% to 1.7%. And finally, after quite a bit of effort by the economic team of the governor and everybody in Puerto Rico through the sacrifices that have been made, Standard & Poor's finally gave us the first upgrade in Puerto Rico's history. And just last week, as was also mentioned, William Dudley, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, indicated that job growth on the island, while still very weak, improved modestly since last summer. He also said that looking ahead to the rest of 2011, he sees grounds for cautious optimism. And finally, he concluded by saying, "I am hopeful that we will soon be able to look back at 2010 and see not only the end of the island's long recession, but also the beginning of an era of growth and prosperity for Puerto Rico." From his lips to God's ears, thank you very much.